Hi there, my name is Hannah Maswani, and for this week, we want to keep it a little bit seasonal. It's cold outside. I believe it's supposed to snow tomorrow, so we're talking about snowflakes. Not, however, the weather terminology. This week, I'd like to discuss a little bit about the history of the word snowflake when used as a politically charged insult. You've probably been called a snowflake, maybe called someone a snowflake, or at least seen this word buzzing about the comment sections for a bit of time now. It rose in popularity around the 2016 elections and typically is used to refer to someone or accuse someone of being weak, easily offended, and unable to take the heat of a charged conversation, right? Snowflakes melt, that sort of thing. But this isn't the first instance of the word snowflake being used as a sort of accusation or insult to people. Now, you've probably heard the term used in different settings. Oftentimes, Chuck Palahniuk, who wrote Fight Club, the fantastic movie that we've all seen and loved, he claimed to have developed the term in his 1996 book. However, that's not necessarily the case. So in the book or the movie, you might remember Project Mayhem, and they're all about taking down the system. A quote that is attributed to their ethos is the following: the notion that you are not a beautiful and unique snowflake, you are the same decaying organic matter as everyone else, and we are all part of the same compost pile. So not super uplifting, but this is typically where folks first hear the word used, unless you've, been hanging out in the comment section. But again, the term snowflake has been used before. In the 1860s, snowflake was used in Missouri to label a white person who opposed the abolition of slavery. The whiteness of a snowflake and sort of the sensitivity that conjures up implied that the person valued whiteness over Black life. So calling someone a snowflake is a term that would get used when somebody said, like, nope, I want to keep slavery in place. You're just a snowflake, that sort of thing. It was also used over 100 years later when its sort of second wave of popularity in the 1970s. It was often a term used to describe Black men or men of color who acted white, right? There's different terms that one can think about today, but that's sort of what the word came to mean in that era. So men of color were called snowflakes if they were seen as either behaving in white ways or seen as defending normative white values over the values of their respective cultures. However, as I've mentioned, it super came into popularity in 2016. The current meaning is sort of derivative of that time. It's often used by older generations who sort of scoff at young folks' hysterical or emotional reactions, right? Whether it's in response to the vote leave around the Brexit of the UK, or whether it's around Trump's winning of the election, right? So we see it weaponized in those ways. Who's using this term, right? So maybe you've used it, maybe you've been called it, but we're seeing it crop up since 2016 and beyond, particularly in conservative dialects, right? In terms of conservative news sources. Here we have it. It's a wee bit hard to read, and I apologize, but happy to provide the sources from GDELT Project. Right around here, this is sort of the early 2000s, like 2010. We see the light green line is MSNBC, the light blue line right over there is CNN, and then the darker line is Fox News. So I invite you to hit pause and kind of, creep up on the screen or check out GDELT Project, where we see the use of the word snowflake in Fox News absolutely skyrocket at this point. And we can see that it's sort of still in use, slightly less so. I bring this up to say that it was used on the news platform itself, and from there has trickled into sort of the more informal conversations that maybe you have around like the Christmas dinner table or, again, the comment section. I bring it up because we know that sorry, that's my dog, who may or may not be a snowflake. And we see the term used in the comment section a lot. We know about sort of the appropriation of the Pepe meme by alt-right QAnon folks, right? We also see the weaponization of the term or accusations of emotion as being sort of weak and hyper-feminized in a lot of the comics of Ben Garrison. Here, it's sort of the attack of the cry bullies, the notion that liberals are always concerned about their feelings. Right here, we see sort of the snowflake in the middle of the wee baby's tummy, like the sort of punk rock hair. This imagery is it connotes kind of older generations looking down and infantilizing younger generations for their political views or their opposition to other political views. Well, at YWCA, of course, we are all about eliminating racism and empowering women. So why I bring up this term is not because I wanted to have a bunch of fun with clip art, although I did. It's to talk about how the use of this word doesn't provide commentary on an argument or commentary on a comment, right? It's not about disagreeing with ideas. When you call someone a snowflake, it's like any other insult. It delegitimizes the person, right? So if I were to call my very barky dog a snowflake, what I would be doing is saying, I don't value anything else you have to say in the conversation, right? It infantilizes contradictory opinions, typically liberal opinions, as being not worthy of engaging with, right? And in a sense, it sort of accuses snowflakes of being snowflakes while using that same sort of over defensiveness that it accuses other audiences of, right? And it also codes community thinking, things like sharing, things like community-based values as being for kindergartners, right? Like kindergartners share, kindergartners talk about feelings. And so there's been extensive amounts of research around this that sort of highlight how the use of snowflake delegitimizes and infantilizes groups as not being smart enough to get what's really going on, right? It ends the conversation, as I've shared, right? So it's used as a shutdown. And oftentimes we'll see the term snowflake used from in any realm of disagreement. So it could be somebody who's, wanting their soy latte, like I often do, who's mad that there's not enough choices, or maybe a space isn't accessible as it could be. But also it's used with the same sort of like quickness as in more sort of intensive dialogues, or rather I should say more broad scale dialogues, such as talking about how refugee programs are consistently being shut down, right? So it's kind of this catch-all, like, stop talking to me, you're a snowflake, that can be used in interpersonal, individualized, or systemic conversations, right? It presumes offense by taking offense at the disagreement. So it's a little bit of the pot calling the kettle black, so to speak, at least in some of the cases that it's used, right? Because can't speak for all folks. However, the term snowflake and its use fits into this larger narrative of being a tough guy and not being concerned with feelings, being more grown up than the infantilized liberal snowflakes, right? You see this coined in a term that is known as special snowflake syndrome. So I don't know about you if you received participation awards at school, but the term snowflake has been used to kind of uplift that notion that younger generations, we typically think we deserve something just for taking part. However, the argument against that from, people who may or may not embrace the term snowflake is, well, who are the adults giving us the participation trophies, right? So it's kind of nuanced, it's kind of messy, but what it does is essentially provide an image, quite literally the image of a snowflake, to highlight how someone might think they deserve that special uniqueness that we see referenced in Project Mayhem through Fight Club narrative, right? Giving Chuck Palahniuk credit for sort of redirecting the word from its original purposes in 1860 and 1970. Again, it's individualized, like me calling you a snowflake isn't me disagreeing with your ideas, it's me disagreeing with all of you and pretty much saying like, I'm not going to listen to anything you have to say, right? And what's problematic about using any kind of slur really, but I'll limit it to this in particular, this insult, is that it really breaks down one's complete sense of self, or at least attempts to, right? And it sort of codes community-based thinking, any tenets of whether it's socialism or kind of social services, even, it codes that as being weak, feminine, infantilized, and sort of all those stereotypes bundled up in one. As I've shared, this insult is kind of rooted in different generational approaches. So you'll probably have heard the term Generation Snowflake, typically referring to folks who are millennials, such as myself, or Gen Z, often quoted as hostile to free speech and, demanding of safe spaces, right? And while that is the argument on that side, it is often interpreted from, my millennial friends and kind of looking up and saying, well, that's also what people who are saying calling people a snowflake are asking for as well, right? So it's sort of this division of back in the good old days versus change that's happening now. And there's a lot of evidence in change management theory that whenever we have consistent sociological changes, it's met with resistance, right? And so Snowflake is pretty much just really good branding in terms of trying to dismiss younger generations' desire for change, whether that change is positive or not, right? And it also feeds into that notion of sort of cancel culture and how cancel culture can kind of be weaponized, all while also Snowflake being rooted in cancel culture itself, right? So for some folks, for some younger members of different communities, and for really more liberal leaning members of any age community or any demographics, folks have embraced the term. You'll see in lots of marches, whether it's women's marches or what have you, folks saying, okay, you want a snowflake, here's a blizzard. It's kind of like with any slur or insult that folks try to reclaim. Of course, the term snowflake not having as horrible a history in many ways as other racial slurs, but there's still that sort of notion that language has meaning, and some folks will choose to see it as a badge of honor, whereas others will see it as an insult. Others will see it as sort of inspiration to keep doing what they're doing, right? So however you feel about the word is absolutely your own right to feel about the word. I just thought it's wintertime and I want to know what it's about. So snowflake, the headline. Is it a bad word? It depends, right? Words are not neutral. They carry the weight of their intention and their impact. So maybe you use a word as a joke, not intending to offend someone, but it offends someone. Both the intent and the impact have to be considered, right? And the reason snowflake is a problematic word, yes, from its original roots in terms of being rooted in abolition and all the tensions around those who opposed abolition, but it's also not an effective word. So I invite you to think about times that you've seen the word used, and has it been a conduit for further conversation, or really has it put an end to a conversation? It can be a roadblock to continued conversation because, again, snowflake is one of those terms that's used to delegitimize and challenge the entirety of a person versus the content of what they're saying. So snowflakes, wintertime, comment section, they kind of put a stop to a lot of progress that's going on, or at least progressive conversation or ongoing conversation, regardless of the topic or the result. So thank you for joining me on a little mini history of the word snowflake. I've been Hannah Waswani, and it's been a pleasure chatting to y'all today.